Today I'm going to show you how to make one of the creepy cottage panels. Although the cottage looks time-consuming and detailed, it's actually pretty easy. Your machine does most of the work for you. I'm going to make this panel right here. It includes an applique border and a cutwork window. My other 3D projects use the same techniques, so once you know how to make this section, you can make any of them. All of the panels are made as a freestanding applique, which means that I need to hoop water-soluble stabilizer, which I have done. I've sewn the placement line on the stabilizer, and I have some fabric all prepared. First of all, I have the fabric for the back, and I just chose a purple fabric for the inside of my cottage, and I have fused it with Pellon, 808 Craft Fuse Pellon. It is really nice. It adds stiffness to your panels so that your house won't fall down. I also have a piece of batting cut to size, which I'll need, and I also have the fabric for the front of the panel. So first of all, I'm going to give the back, the Pellon side, a little tiny bit of 505 adhesive spray. I'm going to turn my hoop over to the back, and I'm going to stick the back of the fabric, or the back of the panel, excuse me, to the back of the hoop. Then I'm going to take my fabric for the front of the panel, and I'm going to place it right over that placement line. And then I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to sew the second color, which is the cutting line. Now that I've sewn the cutting line, I know exactly where to cut, and I'm going to use these nice little embroidery nips to cut nice and close, but I'm not going to cut the stitches. These little nips are great because you can cut so nice and close, and they're so sharp, and they have that tiny little point so you can get in close spaces, which is great for these little tabbed 3D buildings that I'm making. Now that I've cut around the fabric on the front, I'm going to turn the hoop over and I'm going to trim around the fabric on the back. Okay, I've trimmed the fabric around the back of the hoop, and I've trimmed the fabric and batting on the front of the hoop. Normally at this point we would sew a finish for this piece, but on this particular panel there's also an additional applique because I wanted a little trim going around the bottom of my creepy cottage. So I'm going to put the hoop back in the machine and sew the placement line for the little border that's going to go along the bottom of the cottage. Okay, I've sewn the outline for the applique section for the little border that goes around my cottage, and I've sewn it in orange, if you can see that, because I'm going to use black fabric for my little applique section, and it's really nice to not use black thread because it's really hard to see black thread on black fabric and it's hard to know where to trim. So on this particular piece, I want the border to show on the inside of the cottage and on the outside. So I've prepared my fabric. I have fabric for the inside border and fabric for the outside border. And I've already sprayed this with a little 505 adhesive spray. So I'm just going to plop that onto the back of the hoop. And then I'm going to put the black fabric on the front of the hoop. Now you don't always have to put applique fabric on the back, only if you want to or only if the design calls for it. You'll need to read the instructions to know if you need to do that. So now that I have my applique fabric in place, I'm going to put the hoop back in the machine and sew the cutting line. Now that the cutting line is sewn, I know exactly where to trim. I can just use my handy little snips. You'll notice my hoop is sitting on a flat surface and not on my lap, and that is for a very good reason. When you put your hoop on your lap, you've got bumpy things in the way like knees and clothes and stuff like that, and your hoop isn't sitting even or level, and you can dislodge or pull that stabilizer out of the hoop. Even if you loosen it a tiny little bit, it can really throw off your design. So whenever possible, get a nice flat surface to set your hoop on. Sometimes I have to clean a flat surface off of my cutting table. I'm sure you guys don't ever have that problem, but I do. Now that my applique sections are cut, I'm ready to go ahead and sew the next sequence, and in this particular case it's going to be some spider webs on the border, and then it's going to be the finish. When I'm sewing the next sequences, I want to put pretty thread in the bobbin and in the top. There, isn't that pretty? I have sparkly purple spider webs, it's a metallic thread, and a pretty orange border, and the back looks just as pretty as the front. Now I'll put the hoop back in the machine and sew the border around the whole entire panel. So I've sewn the entire border, and I've also sewn the little tabs for the freestanding shutters, and I've also sewn the outline for the window. One of the last techniques that a lot of the house pieces or 3D project pieces use is cut work, and that's usually to form little windows, which make it really fun. So you first sew the outline for the window, which I said I've already done. Then you take your little snips and you just kind of wiggle them down under the fabric and you cut that out. Now we need to cut on this top layer. We need to cut out the batting and the fabric, but not the stabilizer. So I'm just going to start cutting, and you'll see that I can kind of pull back layers of the batting, and I'm pretty safe because there's all that batting in there. And once I get a big enough section, I can see just where the stabilizer is. And again, these snips make it so nice to get a nice close cut. If you do cut the stabilizer, all you need to do is pull a little scrap of stabilizer from your garbage can that's bigger than the window cutout. Put it on the back of your hoop and sew that outline stitch for the window again to tack that stabilizer down, and you'll have covered up your hole, and then you can stitch the next sequence, which we're just about to stitch here. Okay, so now I've got the window cleaned out. I'm going to trim any of these little threads that might get in the way. Now I'm going to put the hoop back in the machine and sew the spiderweb window panes. Doesn't it look pretty? I'd used a sparkle metallic thread for that. It's a gray and black variegated thread that I really like. It's perfect for Halloween. Now what I want to do before I sew the window finish is just make sure that it's nice and clean. There are some little whiskers that I can pull out here, and I'm going to use my other favorite tool in my sewing room, my little tweezers, to get those little tiny threads that just seem to come out around the edges. And now I'll put the machine back in the hoop and sew the finish for the window. All I have left on this piece is the stippling and the spiders. So I've trimmed that. I have one last thing to do before I wash it, and that is to take an X-Acto blade and just slice open the little buttonholes for the tabs. And these are really hard to see because I've stitched them in black fabric and it ended up being on the black stripes of this fabric. But I'm going to very carefully just slice them open, and I really don't want to cut any stitching, so I'm going to make sure that I don't. And if you need to, get a nice bright light right over your work area so you can see what you're cutting. And after I've sliced open all of those and the tabs around the windows and bottom, or the buttonholes around the windows and bottom, you can go rinse it under warm water in your sink. When you do rinse it out, you just need a quick rinse in hot water, and you'll see that the stabilizer dissolves pretty quickly. This is the one time that I would tell you not to wash all of the stabilizer away. We're not making pretty soft lace. We're building a house. We're building a stiff three-dimensional object, so just rinse it long enough to get the stabilizer out of the window and away from around the edges, and then lay it flat to dry. Here is what the panel looks like after you've rinsed out all the stabilizer. You can see right through the windows. They look really pretty, and the back looks just as pretty as the front. Now you can make the rest of your pieces and tab your house or whatever project you're making together, but you can see how easy it is. All the detail is done for you. I hope you enjoy making yours.